Okay, decided to tell the story, and the lighting really wasn't up to snuff the last couple of times, and since I already went to the trouble and I can keep working anyway, I'm going to tell the story one more time. Basically, I'm filling this hole. I'm getting there. And the story behind this is I wanted to remove the birds of paradise and all the roots and go with a planter system instead. And I came up with the idea of doing a terrace, so it's higher up near the residence, and as you get farther away, it drops down. And then all the plants will be a natural planter, and so they're not actually putting roots in the ground that later on you got to dig up. In the meantime, I covered a bunch of boulders and things that I'd already taken out and decided to put back in because it just seemed to me that that's good protection. I really don't know what I'm talking about, but I think it's good protection for the house and the foundation. If next to the foundation you do have some sturdy rocks mixed in with the dirt, that's kind of a way so that the foundation can bounce a little bit, but the rocks themselves, because of the weight of the dirt around them, act as sort of like its own kind of cushion or shock absorber. So that's my theory. But besides that, the terrace idea actually came from something that happened 25 years ago. Back in the early 90s when I started my studio, happened to be at the Studio Exchange in Glendale, Burbank. I think it was Burbank. Gary and Paul ran it. Hey Gary, hey Paul. And I bought my camera there. When I was waiting in line, I bumped into a guy named Doug Armstrong. And Doug was working with a guy named Glen Tonsor. And Glen Tonsor was kind of a unique guy. He actually had worked on two Oscar shows. He did the lasers for two Oscar shows in a row. I think this would have been back in the 80s at some point. I don't remember when. Big budget. He was probably the youngest person I ever hired to do that kind of special effects. He was like 18 or 19 years old. So the first time I met Glen, Doug had me come on a shoot that he was doing with Glen. Glen was doing the live lasers and things like that. It was an outdoor event. He wanted to document it, so before I'd even formally met Glen, he rushes up to my camera, which is on sticks. He looks through the viewfinder and he goes, "Oh, you have a weak red channel." It's like the first thing I hear out of the guy's mouth. I was really pissed. And the funny thing was that by just putting the gain up to 6, these were JVC cameras, and they had kind of pushed ahead of Sony in their light sensitivity. That was around the time of O.J. Simpson or just before, when all the other cameras went dark, and then there's this one camera that suddenly lit up. That was a JVC camera. That was the KY27B. And it was like, what just happened? Because all the other cameras were Sony's, and they were older cameras. And this one of the guys up in the air had been given a JVC camera, saying, "Look, this really got great, light sensitivity." So all the feeds are too dark, and suddenly he kicks up the gain and just lights it up like it's daytime. And everyone went to his feed. So it was a really big deal. So anyway, I didn't know about that when I bought the camera, but I knew that with a little bit of gain, the signal would be fine. But I was still kind of offended. Like, he insulted my camera. But the irony is he knew so much that I just should have listened and, been respectful, but it was just kind of rude, But sometimes rudeness is required when you have a lot of responsibilities to make something happen and you have a limited amount of time. And now it just happened. So anyway, I ended up working with Glen for several years. I had an editing studio and camera, so I would document some of his shows and things. And I learned a lot of how business kind of works. It's very interesting. Glen was doing these live shows for a hair company. You think, oh my God, a hair company. But it was very interesting when he would thread the needle, because he had all this knowledge about lasers and live events and a keen eye So he didn't just want to do a hair show. He wanted to do something that would knock people's socks off, but he had a limited budget. So, but on top of that, he was battling other people at the company who wanted to spend the money differently. Why are we spending all this money doing a tour for Joico of the different conventions around the country? We could just do a commercial and put it on TV, which really probably didn't make sense because you'd literally have to spend so many millions to have any kind of impact. And the live shows, I don't think, went to the millions. And plus, the benefit of the live shows were you were actually meeting the hair salon owners, talking to them, you're demonstrating your product and live, you literally create a stage. And you might have like 50 to 75 people per show. You'd have a show every hour or two. And this was like everything. I mean, dancers would come out, music, and the lights would be going. Then that would fade away, and then the artisans would come out for Joico, and they would each talk about a different aspect of their product line. So it was really a really pretty amazing thing. But ultimately, every year, Glen had to still go over every dollar, tooth and nail, fine-tooth comb to get his budget as tight as he could and still deliver. Meanwhile, there were people at the company, why don't we do radio? Why don't we do print ad? Why don't we do brochures? Why don't we just mail the product out to everybody? So there was always this battle. And but for several years in a row, not only did Glen get the award, but they would win Best of Show at these trade shows, normally at convention centers. So I got to document some of those and film them, which is pretty cool. And one time I asked them, why does your set rise up in the background? Because in their sets, the background would be higher, and as you came forward, it would be lower. And they said to me, well, that's because we don't want the people to be lost in the background, because we don't want people who are sitting in the audience to have them blocked off because there's people in the foreground. And by elevating them, you can see them easier in the distance, and it makes them look bigger. And I thought, okay, that makes sense. So, long story short, I'm kind of using that principle here. I'm going to make this terraced. The part closer to the residence here is going to be higher, and it's going to scallop down in a couple of steps. And I'm going to put planters here. So I first had to get rid of this 30-year-old Birds of Paradise plant with all these roots. Then I threw in the rocks. Now I'm putting the dirt over it, and I'm hoping I'll have enough dirt to do this elevation. I wanted to test, I wanted to put all the planters here first before I did anything, but they were all full, and that just wasn't realistic. Plus I had the Birds of Paradise in the middle. So I'm kind of going by faith, and I'm basically going on the principle that I learned back in the mid-90s from the Joico shows, where you just elevate farther away and have it slope down and see what I get. You know, I don't even know if I mentioned this earlier. When Glen did those laser shows for the Oscar, I think he was the youngest ever to do them. And I think his budget was like $1 million. He did it 2 years in a row. They did lasers. So that was really, to have that at that young age, you know, how do you build on that? And it was interesting to see him apply what he learned on the biggest arena and then apply it to the corporate world. Very interesting. And to learn about, you know, what you're battling and what the, you know, the difficulties. And the truth is, whenever you have to pare down your budget so tightly, where you have what, he used the word once to me, he said, you know, slack is really important. He explained the concept of slack to me. He goes, when you have no slack, basically, you just can't make any mistakes. And that's just not fun. You know, it just adds so much pressure. And that was interesting to learn about that concept, because I think he was constantly dealing with taking the slack out of his budgets and just putting a lot of stress on the project. Anyway, so once I fill this all up, we'll see if my scallop idea, which isn't really my idea, came from Glen Tonsor and his shows that he did. Actually, his associate, I'm so embarrassed because I'm connected to him on LinkedIn. I can't remember his name. It was actually Glen's partner who explained the concept of the terrace team. Now, I see his face. It's right there. And I cannot remember his name. I'm so embarrassed. But anyway, the point is, that's where I learned it. And I like to credit people. When I learn something, I like to credit people. I really believe that's important. To always give out credit to who you learn things from. Because I'm finding, this is really crazy, I'm finding there's things that I maybe watched when I was 5 or 10 years old that may have influenced me, and I never even realized it. I'm only discovering it 50 years later, because those shows are getting rerun, and every now and then I'll see something, and I go, wait a minute, I thought of that. Did I watch it on that show and convert it into my own idea based on that? That's been kind of odd to kind of see that happen a couple of times. I'll tell you a story some other time about someone who shall remain nameless said something to me once, and I was watching TV late at night, and I saw a rerun of Mannix, and the exact thing he said to me, like 45 years earlier, I heard on the TV show Mannix, and I almost fell out of my chair. I looked up the date when the show first ran, and it was about a year before this comment was made to me, which means it would have run once, probably run again in reruns. And I'm thinking, did this person come up with that from watching Mannix? And it really kind of blew my mind that you could kind of piece something together 40 years later, you know, as to why somebody may have said something. So I might tell that story sometime, maybe. Anyway, I lit this. I don't think this was my best take. This is like my 4th or 5th take, but it's the one I lit the best, so this is what I'm going to use.